This is Natale, Astromosaics podcast, and today is to focus on the malefic planets in astrology. That's Mars, Saturn, Pluto, and sometimes Uranus. They have left us this fascinating secret trail, and it's to better understand how the malefics can become ultimately benefic in our lives. And it all starts with potpourri. Do you remember potpourri? Think back to the late 70s, 80s, 90s. Even the 90s, yes, potpourri was everywhere. There was that little bowl of dried up leaves and colored wood chips and flower petal crumbles, and it always had some extra, right? Perfume oil to make the dead things smell better. Probably because plain plant detritus doesn't smell that great on its own in reality, right? So if you lived through the mid-70s through the 90s, I bet right now you can dredge up a memory of that potpourri smell. One of the major jokes during that strangely potpourri-obsessed era was people mistaking potpourri for a snack to be eaten, because that's actually what happened. This is a story from an article in 1990 from the New York Times. The year was 1974, and the occasion was a cocktail party in the Decoration and Design Building in Manhattan. Champagne flowed, the host being Boursac, a French fabric manufacturer. There were bowls of crudités and bowls of potpourri, a fragrant mélange of dried botanicals, herbs, and oils that had scented the historic houses of Europe for centuries. The rosebuds might have been a clue, but no. As Barbara Milo Auerbach looked on in horror, a couple of the decorators reached into the bowls and tossed handfuls of her old English rose potpourri into their mouths, just like it was trail mix, Miss Auerbach said. Most decorators, quote, understood potpourri, unquote, as did fashion designers and socialites. Beyond these rarefied circles, potpourri was largely unknown, as Mario Buada discovered when he presented a plastic bag of Smell the Spring potpourri to a couple in Charlotte, North Carolina, who were prospective clients. The husband looked at the dried leaves and accused me of bringing pot into his house, Mr. Buada said. I said, read the label, see? Potpourri. And then he accused me of bringing in designer pot. But his wife said, why, Claude, it's the latest thing. I saw it in Vogue. Potpourri, man. People were intrinsically attracted to the power this little bowl of plant junk represented. And in 1989, get this, consumers spent $260 million on potpourri products. That's the equivalent of $680 million today, adjusted for inflation. The passion for potpourri was fueled by this desire to transcend social class, which is very Plutonic. Next, I looked up the etymology of the word potpourri, and it became even more Plutonic. Get this. It's an early 17th century word from French, and it's denoting a stew that's made of different kinds of meat. And in French, it literally means rotten pot. Potpourri is actually a rotten pot, and it's a veiled version of the skeleton at the feast. The ancient Romans had this practice. They brought an actual skeleton to the biggest feasts to remind the people there at the feast of impermanence. A real live skeleton. No, that's an oxymoron. A real skeleton. It was there to remind people to seize the day. You know, all carpe diem stuff like that, like eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow you may die kind of thing. But that too can be a distorted way of living, because living just for a material existence, for physical pleasures of the world, is leaving something important out. This is a life lived asleep, like a skeleton zombie-like creature. This is a confused life, anxious, worried, unhappy, despite this feast of life that's spread out all around us. We might find ourselves living on autopilot, like we have endless time. We know intellectually this is not true, but we don't really believe it. We don't act like it. In Buddhism, this theme is described as the philosophy of impermanence, and that just means the objective thought that over time everything changes. Nothing stays the same, impermanence. But unlike potpourri and skeletons, we don't have endless time, and we're still alive. So it's the job of the malefic planets to do the dirty work and try to wake us up before it's too late. If you live long enough, you know from experience what I'm talking about. Life is full of inevitable shifts and circumstances. Sooner or later, there are hard things. everybody has to deal with in their lives. And most of life's blows can be understood through the archetypes of the malefic planets in astrology. So we're talking Mars, Saturn, Pluto, sometimes Uranus, depending on how rebellious things need to come through in your life to electrify some change, get this change going. But understanding the ultimate purpose of these planets that make us work hard and experience challenging things can be a form of spiritual practice. When they're happening, these experiences are so horrible, but they also can help you comprehend the long-term potential benefit of your difficulty and the path that difficulty can carve out through discipline, action, and change. Challenging things are going to happen to you and me and everybody either way. So why not pull back a little bit to this pale blue dot perspective instead of seeing these experiences as seemingly arbitrary, meaningless, and just painful in general? If you don't know what I mean by the pale blue dot perspective, I'm referencing this iconic photo of Earth. It was taken by NASA's Voyager 1 spacecraft on February 14th, 1990. From 3.7 billion miles away, they turned Voyager around one last time and took a picture of home, where we all live, everybody we've ever known, everything that's ever happened. Home, Earth. And Earth is just this tiny speck in the vastness of space, with close to 1 billion little bowls of potpourri plant skeletons adorning households and businesses everywhere circa 1990. So taking that pale blue dot, pulled back perspective of challenging experiences, maybe you can start to see how pain can ultimately become personal power instead of having power over you. Yeah. Perspective is the difference, and understanding the procession of time is the difference. It becomes more clear that a life, your life, must experience some kind of agony so it can also experience and comprehend ecstasy. That's where the power of an astrological perspective can come in, knowing your own chart. Your chart is a pale blue dot view of you and your life experience. Potential types of challenging experiences can be indicated and seen in a birth chart, okay? But the details are dependent on a lot of things. The broad stroke is present. So some variant of the challenge, based on the astrology that's in the chart, some general theme will be part of your current incarnation, can be seen, okay? This is why I love astrology though, because knowing an experience in that kind of theme is baked into your cake, so to speak, that can lead to relief. There can be a removal of blame, of guilt, a lessening of the feeling of dread or responsibility that something that you did caused something. If that's what it's supposed to be in your life, then that's what it's supposed to be. It's something you have to go through. Many of us are seekers because we want to understand ourselves. We want to understand suffering, our suffering, the suffering of others. But the ultimate draw to a spiritual path is the desire to relieve experiences of suffering. The first noble truth in Buddhist teaching is that life is suffering. It is. There's a lot of suffering throughout our lives, whether it be in health, financial security, relationships, family, career, you name it. And that suffering can make us search out a spiritual understanding. But that's not the only way, and it's not the only catalyst, because sometimes in life, your life is good. Think about that skeleton at the feast concept. Eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow you may die. Yeah, it's true. Gotta live in the moment, gotta live for the day. But tomorrow, you may live as well, and you may live the next day, and for many more days after that. Living for just this material existence eventually feels dull. It's a shallow shadow. It's unsatisfactory, it's lonely, and that is also a malefic experience. Melancholy is Saturnian, loneliness is Saturnian. Being disconnected from your true self, the one that's beyond your body, can bring about a desire to connect to something bigger, to understand universal energy. And all of that is connecting back to you, through you. Personally, I reach for understanding through any mode I can. I'm not picky. If there's a wisdom to be had, I am thirsty for it. I've studied religions. I've studied psychology. I've read 1,000 books on 1,000 subjects, just in the attempt to collect little postage stamps of understanding. But astrology, in my experience, has been the only thing that can broadly encompass them all archetypes, all potential, all life experiences, whether they're perceived as good or bad, which is an illusion because sometimes good things actually turn out to be bad and bad things turn out to be great. So they're just things that happen, really. To understand that is a lifelong path to walk. What's the destination of that path? Well, authenticity, authentic realization that everyday events, as well as these extreme events that come into our lives, everybody's life, can be a path to awakening. When you understand that, it releases an inherent anxiety that comes with being human. Just knowing that bad things can happen is a lot of anxiety. But astrology says, hey, this is part of the process, kiddo. This is part of the curriculum that you have on this go around on the planet Earth carousel of life. Ezra Beta says, each of our experiences is like food for spiritual growth. Just as the food we eat can either nourish or deplete the physical body, so can our everyday experiences nourish or deplete our spiritual growth. Do we want to feed the small mind and continue living like a skeleton at the feast? Or do we want to feed our aspiration, our big self? So we have to continually reflect on what we're doing, what kind of experiences we're open to, and what kind of things we're putting energy into. Most of all, though, I think it's important to understand what we're trying to be, what we want to aspire to be in the end. About 10 years ago or so, or give or take, I was going through a really bad period of anxiety, deep anxiety. I was really on shaky ground as an individual. It was just not great. And I was reading a lot of Deepak Chopra books at the time. My favorite one by far was called Power, Freedom, and Grace. It's a really beautiful little book. There was one tiny paragraph in that book that I'll never forget. It gave me a major aha moment. You know what I mean? It was this one exercise. I'll read it to you verbatim. It went like this. Identify the qualities that attract you to others and the qualities that repel you. Write them down on a piece of paper. This is who you are. And if you accept yourself as you are and love yourself as you are, you become immensely attractive because you are natural. Embrace your shadow. Understand your shadow. Forgive your shadow. Embrace the fact that you are the many faces of the divine. You are the prisoner and you are the prison. You are the jailer and you are the freedom also. It is your destiny to play an infinity of roles, but you are not the roles you play. Yeah, that changed my life right there. Just thinking about that, I was sitting there looking at my list, and that list of admired qualities fed my aspiration to be a better person, to elevate my own experience as a human being, because I already was those things in seed form. All those things I admired were me. The exercise also helped me accept the parts of myself that are shadowy. Geez, that part was the harder version because the qualities I wrote down that repelled me were not great. And knowing that that was inside of me as well was a big aha moment. Being blatantly honest with myself about my shadow allowed me to place energy more towards aspiring to the brightest light inside me, to watering and feeding those little seeds to become plants and not the shadow side. And that was through active pursuit, which is Mars, and persistent diligence, which is Saturn, in order to ultimately transcend my base form, Pluto, through some really weird stuff like astrology, Uranus. And that brings me back to potpourri and skeletons at the feast. Both are dead things. They're reminders of impermanence. They bring into focus how short life can be, how we may not really understand why things happen when they're happening, especially the hard things in life. But those things matter. They're valuable. They can be pointers toward the ultimate aspiration of living an authentic life free from fear. As ever and always, I like you just the way you are. I would love to hear your experience, your reflections. I learned so much from you, and I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.